One of my favorite ways to describe a really good friend is a kindred spirit. Of course, if you're a fan of Anna Green Gables, whether you love the movies or the books, you're probably familiar with that term. But it's basically a term that describes somebody who knows you really well. They may not know everything about you, but when you talk to them and you have these really good conversations with them, you feel very seen and heard because you know that somebody is listening to you who gets it. And that's exactly how I feel about my friend Sarah Bell. She's one of Drawn's biggest supporters, and I'm so excited to have her on our podcast because I've already been a guest on Her Stori podcast. It's definitely something you want to check out. I have a link to that in the description of this episode of the podcast. But I wanted to invite Sarah onto our podcast today to specifically talk about this idea of hustle. Hustle is something that we all need in order to achieve our dreams and go after our goals. But when you have anxiety and depression, hustle looks a little bit different. And Sarah is somebody who speaks from the heart and who speaks from experience about what it really means to have a healthy sense of hustle and how to own your own hustle. Welcome to Drawn, the podcast that draws you in with stories of hope, healing, and even a little hustle while battling anxiety and depression. Think you have to wait until you've conquered your mental illness to start living a joyful, meaningful life? Think again. Conquering your mental illness is part of living a life you love, and we're going to figure it out together. I'm Katie Rochetko, and this is Drawn. It's exciting to be on this side of the microphone because last time we talked, you were the one asking the questions.
I know. It's definitely weird to be in the hot seat now.
Hey, hot seat, but I like to prefer it's a warm seat. It's cozy, it's cool. You and I are just going to have fun, just catching up. And of course, talking about one of my favorite topics of hustle, but of course with the spin that, people with mental health often face, the feeling that they can't hustle because they've got these barriers in their life. So let's first of all, I guess, just start about talking about hustle in general in the world that we live in. You actually live in New York City. It's like almost the definition of a bustling city. And so I guess kind of in your own words, what do you see in New York City and how does that kind of is attributed to what we see in the rest of the world about this idea of what it means to hustle?
Wow, great question. New York City probably is similar to what people think it is. It really is the hustle city. People, at least before COVID, right? I mean, especially, now with COVID, things are quieter on the streets, but before COVID, the streets were just always filled, especially your morning commute. You never got a seat on the subway. You were always touching people you didn't know, which is uncomfortable, but that's New York. And everybody had 5 jobs. Everyone's got 6 side hustles. Everybody's trying to make it. Everyone wants to be successful. And most people have that entrepreneur mindset, or they have the climb the corporate ladder mindset. That is the majority of New Yorkers, and it's definitely a whole other world. When I travel outside of the city to visit family or whatever, people are quick to comment on how fast I walk. And the funny thing is there are people in New York City who walk faster than me. So it's just if you come here, if you visit post COVID, prepare to fast walkers. They're everywhere. Everyone walks fast here. Everyone has somewhere to go. And it's just the hustling city that people think it is. It really is.
Wow, I love that. It really is the hustling city. So you're going to have to hustle to keep up with everyone, I'm sure. Does that put a lot of pressure on New Yorkers? Because everywhere they look, it looks like people are achieving and succeeding and going after what they want. And it has that kind of very fighting kind of a spirit almost to it of just all these people have big dreams and they're going after them. So does that kind of create a lot of pressure among you New Yorkers?
I would think so. I mean, obviously I can't speak for every New Yorker, but speaking as a current New Yorker and obviously the people that I've met and interacted with, I would say that it does put a lot of pressure on you. But I think that pressure was probably there before you came to New York. A lot of New Yorkers are transport, so if that's the right word, meaning they, came from another place. They grew up maybe in a small town or maybe in another smaller city or maybe even a different country, but they've always had that hustle and big dreams and that desire. So while I do think that there is an added pressure, I think that for most people, they had that pressure on themselves prior to even living here. And so it's also just kind of the norm.
Okay, see, that's a really good perspective to have because obviously you're a transplant as well. And so, what about this desire to hustle and achieve and stuff? Is that something that you've always had kind of a drive inside of you?
Yes, I definitely have, and I don't know if it was like inherent in my DNA, right? Like if it's nature versus nurture, if it was both. I don't know if that's, if I'll ever really know what it is, because I think we're greatly affected by both. But yeah, I've just always had a desire to stay busy and to create a lot of different things and to do a lot of different things in the world. And it has its like positive effects and it has its negative effects. As a fellow hustler, I'm sure that you're very much so aware that the pressure to be successful can be good and it can be bad as well.
Absolutely, because you mentioned, New Yorkers have a tendency to be everywhere all the time. They're doing a bunch of different projects, they're working a bunch of different jobs, and you are somebody that like I almost have a hard time keeping up with because you are always involved in something new, it seems like, and you have such a passion for so many different things that I love. And so I just think it's fascinating to kind of talk about that and talk about your multi passions and kind of describe in your own way, like, what is it that you do and how do you hustle in your own life?
Yeah, so I mean, you're not wrong, right? I've had so many friends and family say the very same things about me. Like it's hard to keep up with me, and it's hard to know like what's the latest thing that I'm into. It's kind of like a running joke with my friends and family. They're not wrong. Even my partner has said like he's like you hop around from so many different things, and it's hard to keep up. And I'm like I know, and I think that it's a blessing and a cursing. I think a lot of it extends from, my grandmother raised me, and I call her my mom. I lived with her since I was 3, and her and I are very close now. We have a healed and incredible relationship, but growing up, we had a very toxic, unhealthy relationship, and I remember like when we would get into really bad fights, like when I was in high school, and I was like that angsty teenager, and we would get into really bad fights, and she would be very angry at me, and she would say like you're just like your mother, and she meant like my biological mother, who unfortunately somebody who has never had a job, has never amounted to anything, has never really achieved anything. And so it really affected me in a way that I don't think my grandmother knew. I don't think she was meaning to hurt me. I think she was just afraid. And so she was like putting that fear on me, but it resulted in me feeling an immense amount of pressure to just be as far away from my biological mother as possible. And so I had to be successful. I had to be doing a million things at once. And so that it started off in high school. I played every sport that I could. I did theater. I did yearbook. I literally did every activity that my school offered. And it continued on into college, right? I mean, you and I met in college, so you knew you knew how busy I was. I mean, I was doing school full time and I was working full time, and then I was like, I'm going to do the fashion show, and then I'm going to start my fashion magazine, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. And I have been very bad about slowing down. And I think a lot of it stems from, those really impactful conversations that I had with my grandmother that just, they really shaped me, in some ways for the better, in some ways for the worse.
Right. And I know we have a tendency to want to define success. You and I both, we're Enneagram fans. We're both Enneagram threes, which is the achiever. Probably no surprise to a lot of people who know us. But like we have this like need and desire to be successful. And so we define it in very specific terms that don't give a lot of grace or a lot of leeway. And so I'm kind of curious as to you as to like how do you define success and how do you typically or like what's typically involved in a day that you would define as successful?
My definition of successful is currently under construction.
I love
um,
that.
I'm trying to find a healthier, more balanced way to look at things and to define success. So for, a while, success has been very similar to the way the world defines it, which is the world often, at least our culture here in America, often defines success as money, and then also like notoriety. And so for me, that was also how I defined success. And I've always been very bad at relishing in any victory I've had. Like if I won something in sports when I was in high school, or if I placed in the fashion show, or I finished school or whatever, all these little accomplishments that most people would celebrate, as they should. I've always been bad at that because I'm always looking ahead at everything else I have to do and I haven't accomplished yet. And so I'm always feeling like this failure because I'm always looking at what I haven't done. And so right now I'm just trying to change my definition of successful. I want success to be about like doing good in the world and loving people and being a better human being. And I want to be better about extending myself grace and understanding that, some days I'm going to get a lot done and some days I'm not going to get a lot done, and it's okay. It doesn't mean I'm any less successful. So I don't have like this beautiful, Merriam-Webster worthy definition of successful just yet, but I'm working on it.
So that's kind of curious. Like, again, you and I are so similar. Like, do you go to bed at night feeling like, regardless of what you did that day, even like on days where you were madly busy and you did accomplish a lot by a lot of people's standards, do you still go to bed at night on those days feeling like you didn't do enough?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
you and I are tracking on the very same page right now. Like, what is it that's usually triggering those thoughts?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's always a trigger, because I think it's also just been ingrained in who I am over the years. Again, I shared that story with my grandmother, who I do call my mom because she raised me, and how that impacted me. And I do feel like it's so part of who I am that there doesn't necessarily have to be a trigger for me to go to bed at night and feel like I haven't done enough or like I'm not successful enough. It happens on days where I've done a lot, and it happens on days where I haven't done a lot. But again, I have to go back to just trying to give myself grace and understanding. And I find myself talking to myself a lot, a lot more lately than I probably ever have. Just like being like talking. Let me rephrase that. I think I've always talked a lot to myself, but it used to be very negative, right? Like, you haven't done this, you didn't do this, you still have to do this, or you did this, but you did it horribly. And now I'm trying to shift my self-talk to just more positively. Like, you should be so proud that you did this. Like, this is amazing. You accomplished this. You got this done, even though you were really depressed today, or whatever it might be. And so trying to, even though every night I might go to bed and I'm like tossing and turning and I can't, stop the thoughts, I'm just trying to correct the thoughts and correct the way that I view myself.
Wow, I mean, that's definitely something we can all do. Of course, we know that hustling and having these kind of like, I'm not enough thoughts is not just something that people with mental health issues deal with. It's something that anybody can deal with. It's just those thoughts often are, I think, amplified when people already have something that they struggle with, like anxiety or depression. And I know that you and I have had this conversation before about your own struggles, and I've shared with you my struggles. And so, what you're comfortable sharing, I'd love for you to be able to kind of talk to our listeners about what it is that you've experienced as far as mental health and in your battle against anxiety and depression.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I'm obviously, not a professional within the field of mental health, but my limited understanding of when depression and anxiety would be that it can be caused by external or internal factors, or for some people it's both. And so, of course, external would be trauma, and internal would be either like hormone imbalances or like chemical imbalances in your brain. And some people have to deal with both, and I'm one of the lucky ones that has to deal with both. Mental illness runs in my family, and so I do have like the imbalances in my body, and I have to take medication for that. But I also have experienced significant trauma as well, especially at a very young age, and that has shapes you for the rest of your life. And so for me, I've battled depression, anxiety, I feel like forever, but I didn't always know. I wouldn't have always called it that. I didn't always know that I should call it that, or that's what it was defined. I didn't know that there was something maybe medically wrong with me and that I needed medication. I think, it really blew up and it became a big deal when I was in middle school, because you're dealing with like all the hormones of like your changing body. And, I was being made fun of at school. And then, my grandmother, she lost her second husband. So she was really depressed and she was like never leaving her bedroom. So I had nobody to talk to about anything I was going through and no one to help me navigate it. And I didn't know that what I was going through wasn't normal and that it wasn't healthy and that I needed help. I didn't know that, and I didn't know who to talk to. So it was a very tough time for me. I did attempt like suicide in those years, and I was unsuccessful, and I'm obviously glad I was unsuccessful. And I think like the change began. I remember I learned like sometime in high school how to like hide what I was like feeling. So, before, I've always had like very high highs and low lows. My emotions are very extreme. So when I'm angry, I'm like furious. And when I'm like sad, I'm like devastated. And when I'm happy, I'm like exuberant. It's just like my emotions have always been to like the extremes, and I didn't know that that wasn't normal. But obviously you learn that like no one wants to be around you if you're sad or you're angry. Like, people don't mind the happy part, but the other parts they mind. And so, me, I've always had this need to be liked. And because of that need to be liked and recognizing that no one likes me the way I am, I have to hide who I am. And so I would try to like bury and hide the depression and the sadness and the anxiety and the anger and everything that I was dealing with from other people, and just immerse myself into as much as possible. Like I mentioned earlier, just, sports and theater and yearbook and just any and everything that I could immerse myself into. And, the problem obviously with like hiding things and not actually fully addressing them is that they come up occasionally, and typically in really unhealthy ways. And this continued into college, because I didn't actually start to go on medication for my mental health until 2018. So that's been a more recent journey for me. And unfortunately, I lost some friends because I would just blow up one day over something so stupid. And I didn't have the capacity to not blow up. I didn't have any sort of understanding of how to control myself, or how to better myself, I should say. And by trying to control myself, I would fall short sometimes. And, at night I could think back and be like, oh man, I hate that I said that, or I hate that I did that. I hate that I lost that friendship over that. It was so stupid. But I have to like, I can't be angry at that girl, because that girl was doing the best that she could. She didn't have the proper help or the proper guidance. She didn't have like the proper adult guidance that she deserved and that she needed. And so she was just trying to like make her own way and figure it all out, and hide everything that she was dealing with. And so the journey again to being on medication has been more recent, and it's been really good for me. I know not everyone is a supporter of medication, and I was right there with people. For a long time, I was like, I don't want to have to be on medication. But I learned that, because of my chemical imbalances, I need to be on medication. And it's okay to need to be on medication. It doesn't make me a weaker human being. It doesn't make me a lesser person, or, not capable of doing incredible things in life. Like, we sometimes label people with mental illness. We think, well, they can be an artist, but they probably shouldn't have like a huge successful career, because how can we trust them to not get too emotional, right? Like, that's such a stigma that we place on women, but we also place on people with mental health issues. And it's like, no, I'm still capable of making sound decisions, thank you. And so it's been an interesting journey for me, for sure.
Yeah, so I love that you've said that it's a journey, and I appreciate you being able to talk about kind of everything from childhood to college to now young adult. Like, it really is something that you've dealt with for a long time, and on top of dealing with like anxiety and depression, even if you didn't know that's what it was, you also had this sense of like, I need to achieve and I need to succeed. And you mentioned that you really wanted people to like you, and that's something I very much related to. And I thought that the more successful I was, the better I was at things, the more people would like me. And that was like what I needed and what I craved so badly, was that kind of attention. Do you relate to that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think, anytime. somebody is similar to you and I, and we have this like need to be liked, and we're battling a lot, and we're like throwing ourselves into everything in this need to achieve. A lot of it comes down to just the high of recognition when somebody is like, good game, good game, good game, or like they say at the end of every game, or getting an award, or just simply being recognized. It doesn't even have to be like a grand recognition, but just like your a friend saying something to you is definitely like, it boosts you, and you kind of need it, because we are all our own worst enemy, but I feel like it's taken even further when you're somebody who battles depression, anxiety. Like, your enemy's even worse. So
Exactly.
it's almost like you need those outside people to tell you that you're doing good, that you're doing okay, because you're not going to tell yourself that, unfortunately. And, obviously the downfall of that is sometimes you seek to get that positive, quote unquote, positive message from people you shouldn't be seeking to get it from. And that's part of like the learning and the growing process.
So I'm curious as to you, was there like a pivotal moment or a season in particular that kind of made you realize that your childhood and college struggle with anxiety and depression needed a change quickly, and like that's what kind of spurred you to medication and to like getting help in a different way?
I honestly, when it came to taking medication, I didn't even go to the doctor with the intent of like, give me medication. So I was going for a regular checkup, and because I hadn't been in a while, because I didn't have insurance. And in that moment, I was going through a very depressed season. And actually, just to bounce back before I finish that story, before medication, I was battling suicidal thoughts once a month, if not more, for years and years and years and years. Like,
Wow.
all through high school, all through college. After college, like, nobody knows this. Very few people know this, but at least once a month I was battling suicidal thoughts. And I was getting myself through them. I learned how to survive them, because I thought they were just my norm. I didn't know that I could not have suicidal thoughts once a month. I just thought that's who I am. I have to deal with it, and I have to figure out how to survive it. So I was in a really just dark place. I was getting my master's full time. I had been in a car accident the year before that was very severe, and it was still affecting me. And I was working full time, and I was just feeling very unsuccessful. And I actually wanted to look into therapy, because I had never done therapy. And I was like, everything in my life, I probably should go to therapy. I probably would benefit. And I couldn't afford it, even with insurance. And so I'm in the doctor's office, and I'm crying my eyes out. And I'm like, listen, I said to the doctor, I said, listen, I'm not going to kill myself, but I understand why people get to that point, because we want help, but we can't get it. We can't afford counseling. We can't afford this. We can't afford that. It was like, this was my first time going to doctors in like years, because I couldn't afford it. It's like, no, why isn't anyone helping young adults? Why isn't anyone helping people with mental illness? It's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where the resources are. I don't know who to ask. I don't know how to get myself help, even though I know I need help. And I'm so discouraged. And I think she just was like, whoa, something deeper is going on. And actually also too, I had just gained 50 pounds like out of nowhere, which was like really just devastating for me, because I've always had body image issues. And at that point in my life, I was eating really healthy for years, and I was active. So I didn't understand why I just gained all this weight out of nowhere. And the doctors didn't know either. No one could give me answers. So it was like everything was just crap piled on each other. And so she gave me like a test. I'm sure it was some sort of like, where are you on the mental health scale? And then after taking that test, she was like, yeah, we're going to put you on medication, and let's just see how it goes. You'll go on it for a month, and then you'll come back, and we'll see if it worked. And I was like, I don't know. I don't really want to be on medication. And, she kind of talked me into it. And then I actually called my mom afterwards, and my mom was talking about how she's on medication as well for her mental health, and how much it's helped her. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. And honestly, when I first started taking it, I didn't notice the benefit until after the month prescription went up, and I was supposed to go back to her. I was traveling, so I couldn't go back to her right away. And that week, 2 weeks in between were horrible. And it made me realize how much I had been controlling that with the medication I no longer had to control. And so like those 2 weeks off of the medication, I had forgotten how to control it. And so it all came up and it was like, whoa. And it was just very eye-opening for me that like this is something that is good for me and that I should be on. And I do want to note how lucky I was to like the first prescription I tried worked for me, because I know that so many people spend years trying to find the right medication and the right dosage, and my hearts go out to them, because honestly, if the first one I tried didn't work for me, I probably would have just given up. So I got really lucky in that sense.
Yeah, because it took me about 6 months to find the right medication and the right dosage for me as well. And then I was also going through a lot of big changes. And that's the thing that almost sucks the most about these kind of seasons. It's never just one thing that we have to deal with. It always is a compounding issue. It's usually 5 or 6 things all happening at the same time, causing our body to kind of spiral into just complete chaos. And so I definitely relate to that. And I think what's really interesting is that when we get on medication, and again, this is not a podcast to say, yes, everyone needs to be on medication. It's just like, don't knock it till you try it kind of thing. Like if you have doctors telling you that it might be beneficial, there is no harm in trying it, and it's not a life sentence. It doesn't mean you're going to be on medication for forever. And even if you are on medication for forever, okay, who cares? Whatever. It's a
Yeah.
good thing because it helps us be able to start thinking clearly again. And I thought
Yes.
it was very profound of you to say that you had been struggling with suicidal thoughts on a regular basis, and that you knew that you weren't going to actually commit the act, but you understood why people did. And like just the way you said that, it hit a nerve, because that's exactly what I said to my therapist, where I was like, it's not necessarily that I want to die, but I would be okay with not existing for a good 6 months. Like, can I just get into a car wreck, get into a coma? I'd love just 6 months of sleep. That to me, the idea of a coma was more appealing to me than going to work the next day, because I was so depressed. And that's a really scary place to be in. And I'm so glad that you and I were both able to get help.
Yeah, definitely. And the way I try to describe, it for people who just don't understand because they don't battle it, and I'm glad they don't battle it. We wouldn't want everyone to battle it. It'd be nice if none of us had to, but I just try to explain it as like, because sometimes people have a skewed perception of, suicide and people who commit suicide as like, it's such a selfish act. And I was like, you have to understand that in the moments, the people who are battling this, like, they are just so overwhelmed and consumed. Like for me, it was just like, I just didn't want to hurt anymore. Like I don't want to cry on this podcast, but like my whole life was so full of pain, and like pain that it shouldn't have been full of, and pain that just never stopped. It was like once I thought I was getting ahead and I was clear of something, another thing would just come in and just wipe me down, like almost like a huge tsunami wave. And then I would like find my way back to the shore, and then another tsunami wave would come, and it just never stopped. And you're just like, it's not that you don't want to live a happy life, it's that you just don't know if a happy life is going to happen, because anytime you come close to that happy life, a tsunami wave comes in, and it's so overwhelming. And that's what I really just try to tell people, is like, anyone who is battling depression and suicidal thoughts and all that, like what they need from other people is just love and compassion. They need you to show up and to be there and just hug them and love them, and not necessarily tell them that like, you'll get over it, you'll be fine. Like that's not always, helpful to them. And each person is different. Each mental health journey is different. So I don't ever want to give like a blanket, like, here's how you treat mental health, because it's so diverse. But I know for me, in my experience, it was just in those moments, it wasn't necessarily that like I didn't want to exist. It was just that I didn't want to be in pain for, anymore. I was just tired of it. It's like, how much more of my life is going to be suffering? And if it's all just going to be suffering, is it worth it? Like, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I breathing air if it's just going to hurt? And so I think that was like, that's what it was like for me, at least.
Yeah. And you're not alone in that, and I totally relate to that. And it's interesting, my dad is actually he's a health professional. He works as a nurse at a mental health hospital up in Washington State. And I was talking to him the last time he had to come down here to visit me, and we were talking about what he sees on like a regular basis and what his job is like. And we ended up getting onto the topic of suicide, and he said the exact same thing that you did. He said, Katie, about 99% of the people who come in here with suicidal thoughts don't actually want to end their life. They just want to end the pain. And if we can start treating the pain and helping them get over the pain, it takes away their desire to commit suicide because we've actually gotten to the root of what's causing them so much hurt. And so many times health professionals, in the way that our health system works, we don't like to get into the root of the pain. We like band-aids and we like quick solutions and we like just being able to fix whatever the scab is on the surface without digging in deeper. And when it comes to mental health, we all know that we need to dig in deep because so many of our beliefs and our fears are rooted very, very deep into the core of who we are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you've mentioned, going back to your childhood and that desire to be successful and to achieve. I mean, for people like us, when life hits us and knocks us down in that tsunami tidal wave, I mean, it can be so discouraging. And I think you probably got to that point too of just complete discouragement because we're achievers, we're successful, we're putting in extra time, extra effort, and it all seems to be like it's for naught and it's for nothing. We haven't really done half of the things that we said we wanted to do. And so that feeling of failure has always been so prevalent in my life. And I'm sure it's been the same with you, right?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, fear of failure is my biggest fear in the world. And the way I define failure isn't even always how other people would define it, right? Because I think I failed, and other people are like, "What? Like, look at everything you've done, look at everything you achieved, look where you came from, and look what you overcame, and like, be proud of that. That's not a failure." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I haven't done this, and I haven't done this, and I didn't do this right." And it's like you and I, like, we're way harder on ourselves than we really should be.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it gets so deep rooted into us. And so when you go through those like darker seasons and stuff, what is it that you feel like your mind is telling you that's kind of keeping you in that dark season and preventing you from being able to get to the other side?
In the darker moments, I think it's everything, right? So you think about everything that you've ever done wrong, everything that you haven't accomplished yet, and it just sort of like compiles on top of each other. When you're in a deep depressive episode, it's like when it rains it pours, and in that deep depressive episode, it just pours on you, everything, all your fears, all your anxieties, all the things that you feel like you messed up at, and it just compounds all at the same time, and it's a lot.
Yeah. It is a lot. And like being an achiever, being that kind of like success driven person that you are, I mean, how was it that when you were in a depressive state, how did that affect your desire to achieve, or how did that affect your ability to do the things that you love that do make you feel successful?
I mean, for people who are unfamiliar, my medication has significantly helped me, but depression waves do still come.
Sure, absolutely.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
they'll never be completely gone. They just don't happen as often, which is really good. And typically, they're not as severe, but occasionally they can be really severe. And when you're in that moment, I think the best thing for me personally is overruling my emotions for what I know to be beneficial for myself, which is not always easy, and I don't always do it. And what I mean by that is, like, in a deep depressive episode, I might just not want to get out of bed. I just might want to watch Netflix all day. And I know that, like, that's not actually, 9 times out of 10, that's probably not going to make me feel better, because I'm just going to feel more like a bum and lazy and overweight and like all these things, because I haven't done anything to address my insecurities. So my insecurities are just going to go up. And so what I have to do is I have to, like, overrule my emotions, and I have to say, no, you're going to get out of bed. And maybe I just give myself one small task, right? Like, I'm not necessarily going to throw 20 tasks on myself. I think it's helpful to have a list of things that carry you through the tough times, whether it's like music or painting or walking or, like nature or whatever it is. I think we all might respond to different things at different times, but knowing the things that help you through your tough times and then implementing them when you're in that deep depressive episode, even if you don't want to. I've had this conversation with some friends about how I don't know why, but sometimes I just think I don't want to read. But every time I pick up a book and read, I'm happy. And so it's like, why don't I do it more? Why do I think I'm not going to enjoy it? I don't know. And it's the same
Yeah.
thing with working out. I'm always like, oh, I'm not going to enjoy that. And like, I mean, some workouts you don't enjoy. And I try to avoid.
At least not in the moment. Afterwards, you're like, okay, I feel accomplishment. But yeah, ooh, I understand that.
Yeah, totally. So I think just in the deep moments, just trying to overrule your emotions, and I'm not always successful at it, and sometimes I just don't get out of bed, and I do watch Netflix all day, and I think the next step is to just give myself grace and compassion and understanding, because I'm battling something that most people don't have to battle, and so I have to be kind to myself. I have to be understanding of myself, and I have to remind myself that, like, listen, you don't do this every day. So
Yeah.
it's okay if you do it occasionally. And I guess the third thing I would say is celebrating like small things that no one else would celebrate. For instance, like if you did spend all day in bed and watching Netflix, but then at the end of the day, you're like, I'm going to make myself shower. Celebrate that shower. Like celebrate getting out of bed and showering. And no one else would celebrate taking a shower. But, when you're in a deep depressive session, it's even just getting up and taking a shower is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to like celebrate that and make yourself feel good, because if you make yourself feel good about doing the little things, you're just going to keep wanting to do the little things, and the little things turn into the big things.
Yep, I relate to that hardcore. And I want to go back to something that you said kind of early on in this podcast about the stigma around mental health, that somebody who deals with the mental health issues or like anxiety and depression, that they can't be successful, because that is at like the heart of this whole Drawn brand. This whole podcast is really about helping people understand that people who deal with mental health, anxiety, and depression, they do still have the ability to hustle. They still have the ability to create that life that they love. We just have a different set of challenges in that process. And so, between you and I, we are both people who have dealt with our mental health issues. We continue to deal with our mental health issues, and yet we don't let that stop us from dreaming big and going after things that we want. And so I'm kind of curious for you, like, what is it that does keep you going and keeps you wanting to pursue those dreams and not letting depression and anxiety win?
Well, I don't know if this is a good thing that keeps me going, but I think for me, it's the need to not be a failure. And that's probably toxic, but for right now, it's what pushes me on the tougher days to continue to hustle.
Yeah.
That and or pay bills.
Of course.
That also is very effective at this time of my life. Like, I don't want to go to work today, but I have to pay my bills, so I guess I'm going to go to work today. Both of those things push me, and I would like to find something more healthy and positive that pushes me to hustle. And I think that looks something along the lines of making sure that what you're hustling towards brings you joy and fills your cup. Because if something that brings you joy and fills your cup, you're going to want to do, and you don't need something toxic as fear of failure to push you, because the desire for joy and to have your cup filled is going to push you. So I'm working on changing what pushes me.
Yes, I understand that. I understand that. Thank you so much for being real with us. But I love that you said the thing that bring you joy, because again, we mentioned that like it's hard to keep up with you because you are so involved in so many different things. And I mean, off the top of my head, I know that you have your own brand called Her Stori. It's also a podcast. You also have like a photography business. You're also into fitness and are working out a lot. And you also have like a full-time job. You've also got like the New York City life, once COVID dies down. Like I just feel like there's so many things that you're doing that you do find joy in those things. And I think that's so beautiful that like you have those things to keep you going, like things that you enjoy doing, because I think sometimes depression and anxiety prevents us from being able to enjoy things that we usually would enjoy.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, sometimes when you have the things that bring you joy, there might be days that that thing doesn't bring you joy, and that's okay. Like, understanding that, like, you probably were just in a really tough mood that nothing was going to fix, and you just had to ride that mood out, and understanding that that doesn't necessarily reflect badly on that hustle that typically does bring you joy, and that you'll be able to go back to it and find joy again. Or, something that I recently was thinking about. I've always been a very social person. Like, I've always loved people, and always having like people to hang out with, and friends to visit and all of that. And since moving to New York, New York's it's a very lonely city. I moved here at the beginning of 2019, and it's really hard to like make friendships. I feel like it's hard to make friends as an adult anyway, because it's like,
Very
you're
true.
not typically the only people you see every day are your coworkers. And like, my coworkers are great, I love them, but they're all in different stages of their lives. Like, they all have kids, so they all have to like go home after work and take care of their kids. We can't go out for a cocktail or coffee or whatever and get to know each other, right? So I don't have many friends here, and it's been really difficult for me. And so I found myself becoming more and more like a recluse, and just like, I just want to be home. I can't wait to get home. I'm not going to go out. And it's so opposite of who I've always been my entire life. And it's really bizarre, and it's really kind of like sad for me. Like, I miss, having a bunch of friends and always having something to do. And so I've noticed that sometimes I have to like push myself outside of my comfort zone, because right now my comfort zone is being home and being in my bed, which is not normal. My comfort zone used to be with other people, but I think it's just a protective mechanism right now. And I think I have to push myself outside of that comfort zone so I can become who I was again and be social and make friends. And obviously it'll be a lot easier after COVID. But yeah, I think that that's like an important aspect that other people might be able to relate to. Just, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone sometimes can actually yield a really positive response.
I think like when it comes to taking responsibility and action for yourself, like you said, you have to be able to push yourself and be willing to push yourself and not let depression and anxiety win by keeping you in bed day in, day out. Sometimes you do
Yeah.
need a day where you're in bed, but being able to find the strength to be like, okay, I'm going to do the thing that usually brings me joy, whether it's reading a book or trying to grab coffee with a friend or doing something maybe as brave as, going to a brand new club of young adults who are all really interested in like, chess or something like that. I'm like, I'm not really interested in chess, but I'm going to learn to be interested in chess so I can meet new people. Whatever
Yeah.
it is, it's like, being able to push ourselves. That's when we don't let anxiety and depression win, is because just because it knocks us down, it doesn't keep us on the ground.
And something I was just thinking of. So I've been watching this like sitcom on Hulu, and there's an episode where one of the characters is like really just depressed and sad, and her friend comes over to like comfort her or whatever. And I guess I forget what the friend like the what the friend had said, but she was like, your sadness has turned from just like feeling your feelings to like your feelings owning you and you feeling like despair. So now we need to get up and go help someone less fortunate than you. And so they get up and they go to like a soup kitchen or whatever, and she ends up feeling like better about herself. And she's like, oh, I figured out what's missing from my life. And obviously it's a sitcom, things have to be resolved in 30 minutes or less. So like, that's not reality. But I do want to like just make mention of living a life in service and how extremely amazing it is to do that. I I'm a big sister for Big Brother Big Sister, and I just reached out to another organization that I'd like to start volunteering for. And I think, those of us with depression and anxiety, it can be difficult for us to like, volunteer, because maybe we think like, I'm not qualified to volunteer. Like, who would want that? Or what if I'm rejected? Or what if I'm not good at it? Or, whatever. We fill our heads with all of this. But, sometimes getting out of your own head and getting out of your own like self-pity can be helpful. And, serving people who are less fortunate than you can really remind you everything that you do have and everything that you have to be grateful for. And so I think it's about balance, right? Like, we need those days where we do get to wallow in self-pity and stay in bed all day, but we have to balance them out with days that we are serving other people and feeling grateful.
I think that is probably one of the wisest things you have said so far, because so many times depression and anxiety has a very like internal focus, and it very much is rooted in this is how I feel, this is how this is affecting me. And there's power in being able to take a step outside of ourselves and our emotions and see the world through a different perspective. And it just that perspective change can really truly help make us feel better, in the sense that, there are so many times when people who need our help, helping people like releases endorphins into our brain. Like it's actually like scientifically good for us to help other people. And so when you find a way to be able to do that, even for like an hour, just one day a week or one day a month, like it can have the power to completely change your perspective just for that short time. Like you and I said before, this is something that we're going to constantly have to like deal with on a regular basis, and we're all going to have those ups and down seasons. But finding a way to take the perspective off of us and put it in and give our attention to somebody else and realize that we still have value and worth because we can go out and we can help the world. I think that's just so beautiful, because it's like there's a reason why we're still here. And I fully believe that the reason why every single person is still here on the earth is because they have something to give the world, to make the world a better place. And so we
Yeah.
just need to be able to tap into that. Of course, it's hard with anxiety and depression, but it can have insurmountable positive effects on us.
It is really hard, and you and I know that just as much as anyone else, because we battle it as well. So I think just again finding that balance, I think, is so important. And some days you have to muster up everything inside of you to overrule your emotions and make yourself do something is good for you. And some days you're not going to, and that's okay too. So again, trying to find the balance of what that looks like for you. Again, everyone's journey is different, but I think just like we all want to be happy and be filled with joy and feel like we are having a positive impact on our community or the world. And so since we all want that, we all have to make a conscious effort to get there. And sometimes that conscious effort is overruling your emotions.
For all the hustlers out there who might be feeling what we felt and what we've kind of been talking about here, that anxiety and depression, I hope that like you and I can speak to it in the sense of just like, you don't have to be cured from anxiety and depression to still hustle, to still live a life that you love, to start creating a life that you love, right?
No, absolutely not. I think especially since we talked about going after things that bring you joy and fill up your cup as being, your hustles, why would you want to wait until you're quote unquote cured of something? Again, we'll never be cured of, because you need that joy to help you through the tough moments of your battle with depression and anxiety. So it definitely, you shouldn't wait and put it off. I think what's important though is as you're going after these hustles, you try to surround yourself with as much, I don't know, like positivity and perspective that as you can. We live in a heavy comparison culture, and that's something that I deeply struggle with. I do have a photography business, I have a podcast, and I'm like, I'm always thinking about like, oh, I don't have that many followers, I don't have that many likes, I don't have that many listens, or no one's booked with me for months, or no one's even reaching out. Like, I think my photos are great. Are they not? Like, am I just living in a dream world and everyone else thinks they're horrible and no one's telling me? Like, you're just, because we're people that battle depression, anxiety, we are just so difficult on ourselves, and we're living in this culture of comparison, and so we're just inevitably comparing our beginning or our whatever stage that we're at to somebody else's like final spot, and we're just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a failure, like I should just give up before I waste 5 years on this adventure that's never going to be successful. And we put so much on us. So I think it's important to try to gain perspective in however you can, whether that's finding a way to hear stories or read stories of people who spent 20 years before a brand was successful, or whatever that looks like. Because I think a lot of times we lose perspective in our culture, because again, we often see people's final steps, and so we have to gain that, and then we have to just try really hard not to care, which I know is easier said than done. I get it, believe me.
Yes.
But just trying not to care. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I'm trying to do, is just not care how many likes or how many shares, and just focus on the joy that it brings me.
Exactly. And it's interesting that we're having this conversation now, because it's very much like like a similar conversation that I had earlier today about how the world, and especially American society, has a tendency to praise the achievement rather than the journey, or praise the success rather than the process. And so we think that, we often look at these people that we feel like are getting the spotlight because they're this overnight success, and they sometimes get told that they're an overnight success because suddenly people know who they are, and it's like, where did this person come from? They must have just hit the magic button, spun the lottery wheel and won, and that's how they got successful, because that's all we focus on. We focus on the book that was the bestseller, not the dozen books that they wrote before the bestseller. That they
Yeah.
we don't really focus on the process. And when we're constantly in that comparison mindset of looking at people who have quote unquote made it, we're only seeing that one tiny chapter in their lives, and we're not taking the time to look at the foundation and the journey and the ups and the downs that they've been on. And then, of course, the flip side of that is, yes, you can compare what your shortcomings with other people's successes, and then what about the flip side of that being like imposter syndrome, when you suddenly do find yourself in success, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, but I am a failure, but look at all these other things that I haven't achieved, or these other things that I
Yeah.
haven't done right. I can't possibly be successful, or I can't possibly deserve this honor or whatever, and I feel like such a fraud because they think I'm so great, but I know I'm not. It's like
Yeah.
you just get hit from both sides. You can almost never win when it comes to this.
Oh, jeez, it's so true. It's so true. Well, you can't win when you're looking at it from those metrics, right? So we have to like change our ruler and redefine, things like success, like we were talking about earlier, and make it a definition that works for us and that is healthy for us and makes us feel good. I think that's super important.
Yeah, healthy hustle. I think that's something that I struggle with, because it doesn't seem to be something that's shown to us in a lot of ways. It's not really something that is demonstrated regularly. I feel like, of like, you have just people who just seem to have a ton of energy and all of the time in the world and all of the resources, and you're like, oh, that person is hustling.
Yeah.
And so we have this, like, just again, that comparison mindset of that's what hustle is, and I
Mm.
can't do that because I have anxiety and depression, and it's really hard for me to wake up in the morning sometimes, and sometimes I get knocked down for no reason and I'm spiraling out of control, so clearly I can't hustle. And I hate when people think that, and I know that you've probably felt that way before. I've definitely felt that way, of like, because I have anxiety and depression, I can't achieve or succeed the way that other people can.
Wow, I mean, what you just said was super powerful. I've been reading RBG's book, and it's written by like friends of hers, and they put in like a compilation of like speeches she's given and a bunch of other things. But RBG was notorious for like getting 4 hours of sleep or less a night, and it just RBG is such a legend, and she did so many things for women that I don't even think people are aware of all the positive impacts that she had for women and even men, because when she was fighting gender inequality, she was fighting for men as well. And just you look at that and you're like, oh man, I would love to, do as much good in the world as she did in whatever capacity I can. But then I'm like, well, I can't sleep for 4 hours. Like, I need way more sleep than that for health
I'm like a
reasons.
9 to 10 hours a night kind of a person.
I know, like for health reasons, I need more sleep. Like if I want to lose weight, I need more sleep. So we get so caught up in what somebody else's hustle looks like. But hustle is different to each person. We might be looking at ourselves thinking, I can't hustle because I'm sleeping more than 4 hours a night. But other people are looking at us being like, oh my gosh, look at her go, look at her hustle, look at her accomplish all that stuff. Like, she's amazing, she's inspiring me. Like, I want to be just like her. Like, you and I, we're inspiring people like that, at least I hope. And so I think that it's just a testament to everybody's hustle is different, and you know yourself better than somebody else does. You know what you're battling and what you're going through, and you understand your health, and you have your own priorities. And you don't ever have to apologize for that. You don't have to apologize for needing more sleep or for needing a day off or, closing your business down for a couple months or whatever. Everything looks different. Like, none of that you have to apologize for. Your hustle is your own to make it what you want to. And I think, there's a lot of, I don't know, books, podcasts, people in news articles or magazines or whatever that will tell you, oh, you have to burn the candle at both ends until you're successful, and then you can relax, and then you can enjoy your lavish life. And I bought into that lie. I burned the candle at every flipping end for years, and it destroyed my health. It destroyed my physical health. It destroyed my mental health and my spiritual health. I mean, it just destroyed me, and I'm only 27 years old, and I'm learning that, like, no, that is horrible advice. Why are we giving people this advice to burn the candle at every freaking end to be successful and then they can relax? Learn to live a balanced life now, and learn to juggle the hustle with the relaxation that you need, that your health needs, and be happy with that. And don't feel ashamed because you're not burning the candle at every end, because you're not trying to get burnt out. That's not the goal. And that's what's going to happen if you burn the candle at both ends.
Burnout is something that is like, it's an epidemic in society, especially for people in our day and age where there is an onslaught of information of people that we would never meet or ever know existed without social media. And yet those are the people that we find ourselves often comparing ourselves to. And we see more about people's lives and the best part of their lives. If we're being honest, most people are only documenting on Instagram their achievements and their successes. And that's what we're comparing people to, like we're comparing our lives to people's highlights reels. Like, I love that saying because it's so true. But when we get into those mindsets, it's just, no wonder we're all exhausted. It's because we are trying to live everybody else's dreams at everyone else's pace and everyone else's stories, and that's just not us. And so honestly, I think the podcast title for this episode is going to be like owning your own hustle, because you have to recognize that you are on a completely different journey that's going to have its own ups and downs and its own challenges, and you've got to figure out the balance for yourself of what hustle looks like for you, and it's going to change on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's totally going to change, and it might change throughout the years, and that's okay. I mean, I tell people, I'm like, change is the one constant in life. It literally is. That's kind of like, ironic, because it's like, how can change be constant? But it is. It's the one thing that we know will inevitably keep happening outside of ourselves, and even within ourselves. We change and we grow and we learn. At least, ideally we would grow and learn. And so it's like, you just have to get comfortable with change and know that it's okay to change. It's okay to, do one thing one way and years later learn a better way to do it and not feel bad about it or whatever, or have one perspective on something at one point in life, and then your perspective changes because you've talked to more people and you've learned more in your life, and you're like, wow, I think my perspective was wrong then, and I think I'm going to change it to this new perspective, and like, that's always okay.
Absolutely. I think it's so true that we need to be in constant communication with ourselves and really begin to ask ourselves why on a regular basis. Why are we pursuing this dream? Why do we feel like it's necessary to wake up early or go to bed late to get this project done? Like, is it somebody else's deadline, like a job's deadline, where it's like, no, this is actually really important, I do have to get this done? Or is it an arbitrary deadline that we've set for ourselves that no one actually cares if we get this done or not? We've just put that pressure on ourselves. Like, we need to constantly be asking ourselves, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? Is this really something that we want to do? And it's okay to, like you said, to change your mind. That's just part of growth and part of maturity. And for multi-passionate people like you and I mean, we're constantly going from, one project or one idea to the next, because we just find ourselves so full of life. There's so much to do out there in the world, and we have the ability and resources to be able to do those different things at different seasons in our life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have taken up a lot of your time, and I apologize, but actually I don't apologize because I have I've loved talking to you so much, and this whole episode has just been riddled with great tips and tricks and advice. So I'll give it to you one last time. Is there anything like a final message that you really hope that if nobody pays attention to anything else, that they might want to get this one thing or this one kind of soapbox piece of advice that you have for people who are in this season of depression and anxiety, but who still find themselves desiring to hustle and create that life that they love?
Be kind to yourself. I think it can't be said enough. I think we need more like kindness and love and empathy in the world, and we need it for other people, but we can't really give it to other people if we can't give it to ourselves first. So I think it starts at home. It starts with just being kind and loving yourself and giving yourself grace. And then the second step is to go out there and give it to other people.
Could not have said it better myself. Sarah, thank you so much. Can you go ahead and let people know kind of what it is that you're all about? Let people know where they can find you and connect with you, especially Her Stori, because Her Stori podcast is amazing, and you always have so much great advice and insight and beautiful artwork on your Instagram account too.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. This has been really amazing and fun just chatting with you. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. So thank you. Her Stori podcast. So you can follow us on Instagram at Her Stori, story with an I, and then podcast. And the podcast is available pretty much anywhere you would listen to a podcast: Apple, Spotify, Anchor, other platform, Google. It's available everywhere. I would love for people to check it out, follow it. And then my personal page, I haven't been posting as often because, again, I'm trying to get away from this idea of feeling like I have to post or I have to have followers or likes, and just posting whenever I want, which tends to be like once every 3 months, which is fine. But if you guys want to follow me there, I do post a lot in the stories. Actually, I'm really big on Instagram stories, at Sarah Eliza Bell. So Sarah with an H, Eliza Bell.
Perfect. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. It was amazing to have you. And like I said, this will not be our last conversation.
Thanks, Katie. It was so fun talking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Drawn Podcast, empowering women battling anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses. For I believe we've been drawn together to create a life we love. You can find more amazing content at my website, KatieRochetco.com, or follow me on Instagram at The Drawn Collection.